Section 44 of John Inglesant, A Romance. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. John Inglesant, A Romance, by Joseph Henry Shorthouse. Chapter 27, Part 2. At this moment a servant entered the room, bringing a sottocopper of silver, upon which were 2 or 3 stiff-necked glasses, called carafes, containing different sorts of wine, and also water, and 1 or 2 more empty drinking glasses, so that the visitor could please himself as to the strength and nature of his beverage. Inglesant offered this refreshment to the Italian, who filled himself a glass and drank, pledging Inglesant as he did so. The latter did not drink, but offered wine and cakes to the stranger, who refused, or rather took no heed of these offers of politeness. He remained silent, keeping his eyes fixed upon the face of the man who, but a few hours before, had saved him from a violent death. "I have had some feelings of this kind myself in certain places," said Inglesant in answer to the Italian's speech, "and very frequently in all places the sense of something vanishing, which in another moment I should have seen. It has seemed to me that, could I once see this thing, matters would be very different with me. Whether I ever shall or not, I do not know." "Who can say?" replied the other. "We live and move amid a crowd of flitting objects unknown or dimly seen. The beings and powers of the unseen world throng around us. We call ourselves lords of our own actions and fate. But we are in reality the slaves of every atom of matter of which the world is made, and we ourselves created. Among this phantasm of struggling forms and influences, like a man forcing his way through a crowd of masks who mock at him and retard his steps, we fight our way towards the light. Many of us are born with the seeds within us of that which makes such a fight hopeless from the first, the seeds of disease, of ignorance, of adverse circumstance, of stupidity, for even a dullard has had once or twice in his life glimpses of the light. So we go on. I was at Chambéry once when a man came before the Duke in the palace garden to ask an alms. He was a worker in gold, a good artist, not unworthy of Cellini himself. His sight had failed him, and he could no longer work for bread to give to his children. He stood before the prince and those who stood with him, among whom were a cardinal and 2 or 3 nobles, with their pages and grooms, trying with his dim eyes to make out one from the other, which was noble and which was groom, and to see whether his suit was rejected or allowed. Behind him, beyond the garden shade, the dazzling glitter stretched up to the white Alps. We are all the creatures of a day, and the puny afflictions of any man's life are not worth a serious thought. Yet this man seemed to me so true an image of his kind, helpless and half-blind, yet struggling to work out some good for himself, that I felt a strange emotion of pity. They gave him alms, some more, some less. I was a fool, yet even now I think the man was no bad emblem of the life of each of us. We do not understand this enough. Will the time ever come when these things will be better known?" As the Italian spoke, the stranger took his eyes off Inglesant and fixed them on the speaker with a startled expression, as though the tone of his discourse was unexpected to him. He scarcely waited for the other to finish before he broke in upon the conversation, speaking slowly and with intense earnestness, as though above all things desirous of being understood. He spoke a strange and uncouth Italian, full of rough northern idioms, yet the earnestness and dignity of his manner ensured him an audience, especially with 2 such men as those who stood before him. "Standing in a new world," he said, "and speaking as I speak, to men of another language, and of thoughts and habits distinct from mine, I see beneath the tinsel of earthly rank and splendour, and a luxury of life and of beauty, the very meaning of which is unknown to me, something of a common feeling, which assures me that the voice I utter will not be entirely strange, coming as it does from the common Father. I see around me a land given over to idolatry and sensual crime, as if the old pagans were returned again to earth, and here around me I see the symbols of the pagan worship and of the pagan sin, and I hear no other talk than that which would have befitted the pagan revels and the pagan darkness which overhung the world to come. Standing on the brink of a violent death, and able to utter few words that can be understood, I call, in these short moments which are given me, and in these few words which I have at command, I call upon all who will listen to me, that they leave those things which are behind, with all the filthy recollections of ages steeped in sin, and that they press forward towards the light of God in Jesus Christ. He stopped, probably for want of words to clothe his thoughts, and Inglesant replied, "You may be assured from the events of last night, signore, that you are in no danger of violent death in this house, and that every means will be taken to protect you until you have been found guilty of some crime. You must, however, know that no country can allow its customs and its religion to be outraged by strangers and aliens, and you cannot be surprised if such conduct is resented both by the governors of the country and by the ignorant populace, though these act from different motives. As to what you have said respecting the ornaments and symbols of this house, and of the converse in which you have found us engaged, it would seem that to a wise man these things might serve as an allegory, or at least as an image and representation of human life, and be therefore not without their uses. I desire no representation nor image of a past world of iniquity, said the stranger. I would I could say of a dead life, but the whole world lieth in wickedness until this day. This is why I travel through all lands, crying to all men that they repent and escape the most righteous judgment of God, if haply there be yet time. These are those latter days in which our Saviour and Redeemer, Jesus Christ, the Son of God, predicted that iniquity should be increased, wherein, instead of serving God, all serve their own humours and affections, being rocked to sleep with the false and deceitful lullaby of effeminate pleasures and delights of the flesh, and know not that an horrible mischief and overthrow is awaiting them, that the pit of hell yawns beneath them, and that for them is reserved the inevitable rigour of the eternal fire. Is it a time for chambering and wantonness, for soft raiment and dainty living, for reading of old playbooks such as the one I see on the table, for building houses of cedar, painted with vermilion, and decked with all the loose and fantastic devices which a disordered and debauched intellect could itself conceive, or could borrow from pagan tombs the haunts of devils, full of uncleanness and dead sins? You speak too harshly of these things, said Inglesant. I see nothing in them but the instinct of humanity, differing in its outward aspect in different ages, but alike in its meaning and audible voice. This house is in itself a representation of the world of fancy and reality combined, of the material life of the animal mingled with those half-seen and fitful glimpses of the unknown life upon the verge of which we stand. This little fellow, which I hold in my hand, speaks to me, in an indistinct and yet forcible voice, of that common sympathy, magical and hidden though it may be, by which the whole creation is linked together, and in which, as is taught in many an allegory and quaint device upon these walls, the Creator of us has a kindly feeling for the basest and most inanimate. My imagination follows humanity through all the paths by which it has reached the present moment, and the more memorials I can gather of its devious footsteps, the more enlarged my view becomes of what its trials, its struggles, and its virtues were. All things that ever delighted it were in themselves the good blessings of God, the painter's and the player's art, action, apparel, agility, music. Without these, life would be a desert. And as it seems to me, these things softened manners so as to allow religion to be heard, who otherwise would not have been listened to in a savage world, and among a brutal people destitute of civility. As I trace these things backward for centuries, I live far beyond my natural term, and my mind is delighted with the pleasures of nations who were dust ages before I was born. I am not concerned to dispute the vain pleasures of the children of this world, exclaimed the stranger with more warmth than he had hitherto shown. Do you suppose that I myself am without the lusts and desires of life? Have I no eyes like other men, that I cannot take a carnal pleasure in that which is cunningly formed by the enemy to please the eye? Am I not warmed like other men? And is not soft clothing and dainty fare pleasing to me as to them? But I call on all men to rise above these things, which are transitory and visionary as a dream, and which you yourself have spoken of as magical and hidden, of which only fitful glimpses are obtained. You are pleasing yourself with fond and idle imaginations, the product of delicate living and unrestrained fancies. But in this the net of the devil is about your feet, and before you are aware, you will find yourself ensnared forever. These things are slowly but surely poisoning your spiritual life. I call upon you to leave these delusions and come out into the clear atmosphere of God's truth, to tread the life of painful self-denial, leaving that of the powerful and great of this world, and following a despised Saviour who knew none of these things, and spent his time not in kings' houses gorgeously tricked out, but knew not where to lay his head. You speak to me of pleasures of the mind, of music, of the painter's art. Do you think that last night, when beaten, crushed and almost breathless, in the midst of a bloodthirsty and howling crowd, I was dimly conscious of help? And looking up I saw you, in the glare of the lanterns, in your courtier's dress of lace and silver. Calm, beneficent, powerful for good, you did not seem to my weak human nature and my low needs and instincts beautiful as an angel of light. Truly you did. Yet I tell you, speaking by a nature, and in a voice that is more unerring than mine, that to the divine vision of us two at that moment, you were the one to be pitied. You were the outcast, the tortured of demons, the bound hand and foot, whose portion is in this life, who, if this fleeting hour is left unheeded, will be tormented in the life to come. The Italian turned away his head to conceal a smile, and even to Inglesant, who was much better able to understand the man's meaning, this result of his interference to save his life appeared somewhat ludicrous. The Italian, however, probably thinking that Inglesant would be glad to be relieved from his strange visitor, seemed desirous of terminating the interview. "His Grace expects me," he said to Inglesant, "at the Casa de Morte this morning, and it is near the time for him to be there. I will therefore take my leave." "Ah, the Casa de Morte. Yes, he will expect me there also," said Inglesant, with some slight appearance of reluctance. "I will follow you anon." He moved from the indolent attitude he had kept till this moment before the sideboard, and exchanged with the Italian those formal gestures of leave-taking and politeness in which his nation were precise. When the Italian was gone, Inglesant summoned a servant, and directed him to provide the stranger with an apartment, and to see that he wanted for nothing. He then turned to the fanatic, and requested him as a favour not to attempt to leave the palace until he had returned from the Duke. The stranger hesitated, but finally consented. "I owe you my life," he said, "a life I value not at a straw's weight, but for which my master may perchance have some use even yet. I am therefore in your debt, and I will give my word to remain quiet until you return. But this promise only extends to nightfall. Should you be prevented by any chance from returning this day, I am free from my parole." Inglesant bowed. "I would," continued the man, looking upon his companion with a softened and even compassionate regard, "I would I could say more. I hear a secret voice, which tells me that you are even now walking in slippery places, and that your heart is not at ease." He stopped and seemed to seek earnestly for some phrases or arguments which he might suppose likely to influence a courtier placed as he imagined Inglesant to be. But before he resumed, the latter excused himself on the ground of his attendance on the Duke, and promising to see him again on his return, left the room. Inglesant found a carriage waiting to convey him to the Hospital of Death, as the monastic house adjoining the public Campo Santo was called. The religious performance had already begun. Passing through several sombre corridors and across a courtyard, he was ushered into the Duke's presence, who sat, surrounded by his court and by the principal ecclesiastics of the city, in an open balcony, or loggia. As Inglesant entered by a small door in the back of the gallery, a most extraordinary sight met his eyes. Beyond the loggia was a small yard or burial ground, and beyond this the Campo Santo stretching out into the far country. The whole of the yard immediately before the spectators was thronged by a multitude of persons of all ages and ranks, apparently just risen from the tomb. Many were utterly without clothing, others were attired as kings, bishops, and even popes. Their attitudes and conduct corresponded with the characters in which they appeared, the ecclesiastics collecting in calm and sedate attitudes, while many of the rest, among whom kings and great men were not wanting, appeared in an extremity of anguish and fear. Beyond the sheltering walls which enclosed the court, the dazzling heat brooded over the Campo Santo to the distant hills, and the funereal trees stood, black and sombre, against the glare of the yellow sky. At the moment of Inglesant's entrance, it appeared that something had taken place of the nature of an excommunication, and the ecclesiastics in the gallery were, according to custom, casting candles and flaming torches, which the crowd of nude figures below were struggling and fighting to obtain. A wild yet solemn strain of music that came apparently from the open graves ascended through the fitful and half-stifled cries. The first sight that struck upon Inglesant's sense as he entered the gallery from the dark corridors was the lurid yellow light beyond. The second was the wild, confused crowd of leaping and struggling figures in a strange and ghastly disarray, naked or decked as in mockery with the torn and disordered symbols of rank and wealth, rising as from the tomb, distracted and terror-stricken, as at the last great assize. The third was the figure of the Duke turning to him, and the eyes of the priests and clergy fixed upon his face. The words that the fanatic had uttered had fallen upon a mind prepared to receive them, and upon a conscience already awakened to acknowledge their truth. A mysterious conviction laid hold upon his imagination that the moment had arrived in which he was bound to declare himself, and by every tie which the past had knotted round him to influence the Duke to pursue a line of conduct from which his conscience and his better judgment revolted. On the one hand, a half-aroused and uncertain conscience; on the other, circumstance, habit, interest, inclination, perplexed his thoughts. The conflict was uneven, the result hardly doubtful. The eyes of friends and enemies, of agents of the Holy See, of courtiers and priests were upon him. The inquiring glance of the aged Duke seemed to penetrate into his soul. He advanced to the ducal chair. The solemn music that streamed up as from the grave wavered and faltered as if consciousness and idea were nearly lost. Something of the old confusion overpowered his senses. The figures that surrounded him became shadowy and unreal, and the power of decision seemed no longer his own. Out of the haze of confused imagery and distracting thought which surrounded him, he heard with unspeakable amazement the Duke's words. "I have waited your coming, Mr. Inglesant, impatiently, for I have a commission to entrust you with, or rather my daughter, the great Duchess, has written urgently to me from Florence to request me to send you to her without a moment's delay. Family matters relating to some in whom she takes the greatest interest, and who are well known, she says, to yourself, are the causes which lead to this request." Inglesant was too bewildered to speak. He had believed himself quite unknown to the Grand Duchess, whom he had never seen, but as he had passed before her in the ducal receptions at Florence. Who could these be in whom she took so great an interest, and who were known to him? But the Duke went on, speaking with a certain melancholy in his tone. "I have wished, Mr. Inglesant," he said, "to mark in some way the regard I have conceived for you, and the obligation under which I conceive myself to remain. It may be that, in the course that events are taking, it will no longer, in a few weeks, be in my power to bestow favours upon any man. I desire, therefore, to do what I have purposed before you leave the presence. I have caused the necessary deeds to be prepared, which bestow upon you a small fief in the Apennines, consisting of some farms and of the villa castle of San Giorgio, where I myself in former days have passed many happy hours. He stopped, and in a moment or two resumed abruptly, without finishing the sentence. The revenue of the fief is not large, but its possession gives the title of cavalier to its owner, and its situation and the character of its neighbourhood make it a desirable and delightful abode. The letters of naturalization, which are necessary to enable you to hold this property, have been made out, and nothing is wanting but your acceptance of the gift. I offer it to you with no conditions and no request, save that, as far as in you lies, you will be a faithful servant to the Grand Duchess when I am gone. The Duke paused for a moment, and then, turning slightly to his chaplain, he said, The Reverend Fathers will tell you that this affair has not been decided upon without their knowledge, and that it has their full approval. These last words convinced Inglesant of the fact that had occurred. Although the Duke had said nothing on the subject, he felt certain that the deed of cession had been signed, and that for some reason or other he himself was considered by the clerical party to have been instrumental in obtaining this result, and to be deserving of reward accordingly. He had never, as we have seen, spoken to the Duke concerning the succession, and his position at the moment was certainly a peculiar one. Nothing was expected of him but that he should express his grateful thanks for the Duke's favour and leave the presence. Surely, at that moment, no law of heaven or earth could require him to break through the observances of civility and usage, to enter upon a subject upon which he was not addressed, and to refuse acts of favour offered to him with every grace and delicacy of manner. Whatever might be the case with other men, he certainly was not one to whom such a course was possible. He expressed his gratitude with all the grace of manner of which he was capable. He assured the Duke of his readiness to start immediately for Florence, and he left the ducal presence before many minutes had passed away. He found before long that all his conjectures were correct. The Duke had signed the deed of cession, and the report which was sent to Rome by the papal agents stated that, in the opinion of the most competent judges, this result was due to Inglesant's influence. Before his arrival, the Duke had leaned strongly towards the secular and anti-papal interest, and had even encouraged heretical and Protestant emissaries. Avoiding with great skill all positive allusion to the subject, the report went on to state, Il Cavalier Inglesant had thrown all his influence into the Catholic and religious scale, and had, by the loftiness of his sentiment and the attraction of his manner, entirely won over the vacillating nature of the Duke. Too much satisfaction the Cardinal of Umbria and the heads of the Church in that city assured the papal court could not be expressed at the manner in which the agent of the society had fulfilled his mission. Inglesant's departure from Umbria was so sudden that he had no opportunity of again seeing the stranger whom he had left in the palace, and he was afterwards at some trouble in obtaining any information respecting him. As far as could be ascertained, he waited in the palace, according to his promise, until the evening, when, finding that Inglesant did not return, he walked quietly forth, no man hindering him. What his subsequent fate was is involved in some obscurity, but it would appear that, having publicly insulted the host in some cathedral in the south of Italy, he was arrested by the Holy Office and thrown into prison, from which there is reason to believe he never emerged. End of section 44. Read by Belinda McReynolds, Melbourne, 3rd September 2024.